The months leading up to graduation probably drew mixed feelings amongst the class of 1941. The entire country was moving rapidly towards a war footing. Nearby, the Brooklyn Navy Yard had become the world's largest facility for building battleships due to a surge in military spending. There were also concerns about sabotage and attacks. New York Harbor was the busiest port in the country, and American vessels were beginning to play a dangerous game of cat and mouse with German U-boats in the Atlantic. For the boys, the final few months at Regis afforded them some distractions such as Bear Mountain Day. There was also a tradition of senior talks in May. One senior would give talks to underclassmen each day in the quad. It was also around that time when results of the senior poll would be announced. 8 decades later, the poll would provide us with some interesting cultural insight into that era. The 1941 boys considered Fordham their favorite college. Their favorite authors were Shakespeare and Kenneth Roberts, and they would choose Shakespeare's Julius Caesar and the new Broadway comedy, Life with Father, as their most loved plays. At school, their favorite course of study was Latin. Similar to many future Regians, the 1941 boys would list reading as their favorite hobby, with the New York Times and Reader's Digest topping the list of preferred periodicals. Baseball was the class's sport of choice, and as a stark reminder of the times, a majority of the boys' favorite team was the New York Giants, which played in the old Uptown Polo Grounds. However, in 1941, it would be the city's 2 other teams that would reign supreme in what some call the best baseball season ever. That year, the National League champion Brooklyn Dodgers would face the American League-winning New York Yankees in the World Series. The Yankees would end up victorious over 5 games. Robert Waldron would be amongst the happy minority in the class of 1941 who supported the Dodgers. During his time at Regis, he worked regularly after school at Ebbets Field, where he would have had a great view of the team. Radio was the main form of entertainment at home, as television didn't become mainstream until a decade later. The class would favor entertainers such as Glenn Miller and Bob Hope. On the silver screen, they voted Spencer Tracy and Lana Turner as their favorites. Musically, the 1941 boys voted the Blue Danube as their favorite. But the poll also revealed an edgier side to their tastes in picking I'll Never Smile Again by a rebellious young singer from Hoboken as another favorite tune. There were also the usual Hall of Fame personality awards. William O'Neill was named the luckiest and most optimistic, which says a lot during those times. Justin Walker, the wittiest and best comedian. James Murphy, the most literary. George Cogswell, the most original and entertaining. And Alex Mazzia, the most versatile and energetic. Jim O'Malley was considered the one most likely to succeed. Russell Casey, the best looking. John Duffy, the best dressed, while the fastest talker was Jim Greer, and Ed Dolan, the class's best musician. On the more serious peer awards, the 1941 class would vote the hard-working Robert Johann as the most scholarly and the best student. The Mighty Mite Joe Connors would be their top athlete. James O'Malley was the most acclaimed in the oratorical arts, and the one who did the most for Regis. The fiery editor of the Regis Quarterly, Joe Landy, would be voted the class's best writer. Ed McCoy, the senior class president, was not only the most popular, but also the one who did the most for the 1941 class. and Bernard Lavin would be recognized as the king of the stage. When commencement loomed, it was also a time for seniors to consider their plans after graduation. During that era, only half of all American teenagers of around 18 years old would complete high school, and of those that did, only a quarter would go on to college. While all the 1941 graduates would aspire to a tertiary education, for many, attending college would not be immediately after Regis.
Again, anecdotally, we do know some boys went off to college, but then they didn't finish because, again, the financial pressure. But there was, by far, a much higher percentage of Regis graduates went on to college.
Many would work for 1 to 3 years before applying.
Many of them, of course, would have lived at home. They would not have been living away at school because that would have been a considerable additional cost.
College options were also far more limited, not just for practical cost-related reasons.
We know that the school, which was pretty much typical of most Catholic high schools in this country, students were not allowed to go to a non-Catholic college. So that wasn't true until about 1966, 67. They wouldn't send their transcript. The only exceptions would be for the military academies and some engineering schools.
College applications would take place around the end of the senior year and was a much less involved process.
It was a relatively simple process. I tell students that I actually at one point applied to Georgetown, and it took me 15 minutes to do the whole process. It was basically a four-page application, handwritten, and that's all there was to it. It was not nearly as complicated, obviously, as it is in these days.
Attending traditional colleges was also not the only option for Regians. Up through the 1940s, Regis would typically have 8 to 12 graduates choosing to join seminaries to enter the priesthood. The class of 1941 was no different. 10 boys of that class would choose that calling initially around the time of graduation. Tom Gartland, who had voiced opinions on rights and civic concerns in the Regis Quarterly, entered the New York Cathedral Seminary with aspirations to become a diocesan priest.
Most parishes are staffed by diocesan priests, and it could well be that some of the Regians, in discerning their vocation, would discern that they really want to do parish work as a diocesan priest, and so they would go into the diocesan seminary.
The quiet but scholarly Frank Standerwick, who was one of the class's top students, chose to join the Fathers of the Atonement Order. Joe Fallon, the intimidating shortstop from St. Joan of Arc in Queens, and Robert Morris from the Sacred Heart Grammar School gang in Jersey City would enter Providence College to join the Dominican Order.
As the case with many of them, and this is many Regis graduates over the years, a lot might depend on their home parish. That sometimes you had a home parish that was staffed by Dominicans or Franciscans and so on. You might have developed an early connection to one or other of those orders, so not surprisingly, you could end up joining one of those orders.
One of Rob Morris's neighbors in Jersey City, the energetic Jim Greer, would choose to join the Jesuit Society. Joining Greer at the Jesuit novitiate on St. Andrews on the Hudson were 5 others. John McConnell, who was the prefect of the Guard of Honor at Regis. Ed Dolan, the talented pianist who would perform at the commencement ceremony. Bernard Lavin, the Renaissance man who conquered the Regis stage, and the head editors of the 2 Regis publications, Alan Cameron of the Owl, and the feisty Joe Landy of the Regis Quarterly.
Many who entered the society would have had their first contact with the Society of Jesus in the high schools that they were working with. In those days, even in my time here, when I was a student, a good half of the faculty were Jesuits. So, it was not unusual to have a lot of contact with a number of different Jesuits.
Later, within a year of graduation, after taking time for careful reflection, 2 more of the class of 1941 would elect to follow their religious vocations, bringing the total to 12. Austin Bennett, who had led the Regis Mission Club as a senior, would decide to become a diocesan priest. while the brilliant Robert Johann would offer his talents to the Jesuits. On the Monday evening of June 16th, graduation ceremonies for the class of 1941 were held at Regis. For the 93 boys who collected their diplomas, it must have been a wondrous occasion to celebrate the end of a 4-year high school journey. Even amidst uncertainties, they all surely looked forward to life after Regis.
Since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.